Good afternoon, everyone. We're live with today's webinar featuring Pete Ryan, who is a former board member of the Chamber and a banking professional with decades of experience in big banks and other elements of financial services. Pete is currently a director at Judo Bank, which is a small business bank set up by former head of NAB's business banking business. And in terms of how we'll run the mechanics, there is a Q&A function on the Zoom control panel for anyone who's unfamiliar with Zoom. If anyone wants to ask a question during the discussion, please pop it in there. You can be assured of anonymity. I will not read out who the question has come from. So all we'll do is convey that question to Pete, but without any identifying features for you. So without further ado, Pete, we've had an interesting couple of weeks, and the goalposts have changed again this morning. The threshold has been raised from 3 million to 10 million around sort of the payment holidays and whatever. Loan guarantee scheme still appears to be a fantastic announcement, with no one actually knowing when it's going to start and how the mechanics are going to work and bits and pieces like that. How's your week been last week? I mean, what's been the themes for you?
I think the biggest theme for us and me has been how quickly things change day on day. What we think is the lay of the land today changes tomorrow, so people have had to adapt on the run, which is very challenging to do in this environment, but that's probably been, and you've just got to be across everything and keep up to date with all the changes as they happen.
One of the regular things coming through to me from member companies that I'm talking to is they're really keen to talk to their bank.
Yep.
They can't actually get anybody to pick up the phone. I mean, what's the scenario like? You've been in the big banks, you're now in a more nimble environment. What's the advice for everyone?
Well, I suppose it just depends where you bank and what segment of the bank. The real small business end of the major banks has a high client to relationship manager ratio. So you might have a banker with 500 clients. So getting through is going to be problematic. But if you've got a fair bit of debt, then you're probably going to have a relationship manager with a less clients to look after, obviously, to manage that risk. So if you can't get through to a relationship manager, I would electronically on their websites place a request for a call back and that you want assistance. Because I think Ross McEwen from the NAB last night was on Channel 7, and he said they had as many calls last week as they got in a year at NAB. So I think we have to put it in perspective, the volume of calls, and some of that might just be everyday business too, so it's not everyone ringing up, but like a good example might be a gym, for example, that has a merchant facility and they're debiting retail consumers' account every month for the gym membership. Well, they might be, every gym in Australia might be ringing their bank, what do I do to turn this off? Can I still debit it legally? You know, there's every business, it's not all debt related, it could just be everyday transactional matters. So the depth and width of this state we're in applies to all facets of banking. It's mum and dads with their home loan, it's businesses not being able to meet repayments, it affects direct debits, merchants, all sorts of things.
Right. When we did our Protecting Your Business session last Tuesday with BRI Ferrier and McGrath-Nicol, one of the things that came out loud and clear on that was it's really important to talk to your bank, talk to them early, be really clear in terms of what it is that you want, and what your plan is going forward. And that's all well and good, but a few people have been speaking to me over the course of the weekend even and saying, I know that's really good advice. I'm just a bit worried about having that conversation with my bank. What are your sort of top tips for that? When you get one of those calls, because you're one of the guys that people can actually get through to.
Yep.
What are you looking to find out? Talk us through that conversation.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just talk about what I'm personally looking for, whether it was during this crisis or the GFC or when the dollar collapsed in 99, whatever the case may be. First thing, if you're going to have a meeting with your bank or a detailed telephone call or a Skype or whatever it is in this current climate, you've got to be prepared and know your position. So know your worst case scenario, I think, and McGrath Nicol would have probably covered off on all this, so forgive people if I'm repeating. But what do I mean by know your position? Well, just get a pen and paper and work out what is your weekly cash inflow, or it might be outflow if your business is closed at the moment. What outgoings can you change, i.e. can you ring the ATO, can you make an arrangement with a supplier? But what are out of all the businesses I spoke to last week, rent seems to be the biggest chestnut that small business can't change at the moment. Now that will probably change in light of last night's discussions. And then forecast the worst case. So, and this is the tricky part, we don't know how long this is going to go on for, but if, say you had a hotel, for instance, you're closed at the moment, so what does my net cash position look like at the end of 3 months with 2 months no trading? You've sort of got to make a few assumptions and go, this is what I think where we're at. I think the major banks are working on a 4 to 6 month type thing, but I'd just go with what you think is realistic with what we know today, because bear in mind it all might change. And then with that forecast, like that cash flow, work out what effect the coronavirus is going to have on it. And then, so that just covers off where am I now? I've got a weekly cash flow deficit of X for 3 months, and that sort of tells you where you're at now. The second part is your capacity and liquidity to meet that shortfall. So have you got your own cash or other means that you can tip in? If not, do you need the bank to help you in part or with all of that? And there's no shame in saying you need the bank's help. This is a once in 100-year crisis, so no bank should judge people for asking for help in that regard. So the capacity and liquidity of a business is really important, because you need money that you've either got or the bank needs to give you to keep you going until the tap gets turned back on, for want of a better word. And then probably a good thing to tie into this discussion with your bank, make a list of all your collateral, like all your business assets, what plant and equipment's worth, your current debtors, your current stock, and what that looks like. And with debtors, are they collectible as well? Like, is there any bad debts in that? So that gives the bank a helicopter view of what assets you've got. Plant and equipment for me is the hidden gold with asset-heavy business, because they're heavily depreciated on the balance sheet. You could get a valuation on that and give the bank more comfort about your asset position. And part of that review might be, when things turn around a little bit, to pay the bank loan back. It might be to divest a non-core asset that you've identified through this process. We hardly use that machine. We'll commit to sell that in 9 months' time when the market's better, and use that to in part pay back the bank rather than just principal and interest monthly repayments. So that's probably the third thing. And then the fourth thing, and don't underestimate this one because it's very important and people undersell themselves, talk about your management capability and your years of experience in your industry and how you can use that to get through this crisis, because that you can draw on every bit of experience you've ever had to find a way here. And probably the more experienced you are, that can give the bank more comfort that you've got the industry contacts, the know-how and the way to find a way. It's not to say if you've only been trading for 2 years, that's a bad thing, but it does make it harder in terms of those 4 things I've summarised. I could go on for a long time about it, but those 4 points, because the bank really wants to know how much do you need, when are they going to get their money back, and why are they going to get their money back from you? So part of it is very personal. So you almost have to sell your business and yourself to the bank that you're across this issue, you've got it. It is a crisis, but I've got a plan and I'm going to get out of it. Banks worry about people that don't have a plan, or they don't want to face the reality of the situation. So no matter how grim it is, banks do take on board this person knows the jam they're in, and they're rolling up their sleeves to find a way through it. And banks want to hear that you've got a plan, so that gives them confidence to work with you rather than against you. So.
Okay. All right. Well, interesting, the rent question. And yeah, that was a key part of last week's discussion. The announcement that Anna Bligh made earlier this morning talked about commercial landlords were now eligible for that payment holiday on the proviso that they didn't terminate leases or carry out evictions during the time of that relief. I didn't gather from the statement how that would be policed or whatever, but I assume it'll be through reporting back to the bank that you have met the criteria for the relief over the piece. A few people had spoken to me about their concern post that conversation, and if they were able to get assistance, let's be optimistic that we come out the other side and the economy sort of improves through things, and organisations are looking at what they would be looking for normal growth and funding activities. There's a bit of a concern that going to you guys now and saying, look, I'm in a spot of bother, even if they've come out the other side of it, that it almost sort of sits there as a bit of a query. Can you allay those fears?
I don't think there's enough information out about how the credit reporting bureau side of it will work, but all I can say to answer your question succinctly is people can actually enhance their reputation in this crisis by being proactive with their bank and working their way through it. As I said to you before, this is a once in 100 year. I can't, and I would hate to think it would happen that a major bank in this country would judge someone for the predicament they're in at the moment, because a lot of it's outside anyone's control. So I think pride just has to be put aside, and from a client point of view, and banks have to put judgment aside and just treat every case on its merits. Now, whether that happens, and I think it should, and I'm sure major banks are giving staff training around this. I know we are. We're just treating everyone like an individual case, how we can best assist them, because if you start lumping everyone in the same bucket, everyone's got a unique problem at the moment, and you just got to share that point with everyone out there, that you've just got to get on the phone if you can, or lodge a inquiry so that you get a call back. And if you really don't feel confident having that call with the bank, if you've got a great relationship with your accountant, have a telecon with the accountant in the meeting as well. If you really, some people really get nervous about financial discussion. They know their business inside out, but when the questions start coming about the financials and the weekly cash flow, they get unsettled. So I know accountants are going to be probably the busiest people in Australia at the moment, but see if you can do that. That might help for people that are scared of talking to their bank.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk about the SME loan guarantee scheme, and everyone, getting excited about potentially here's $250,000 that I can access. But if some of the member companies are saying to me, look, we really don't want to be taking on a lot of debt at the minute. So there is some wariness of that. There's wariness about the mechanics, and you made a point earlier around, the normal credit processes. You guys are just out of a royal commission that pummeled you for irresponsible lending, and then we've now got a scheme which, as I understand it, the government's effectively underwriting unsecured lending to business. How do those two sit together?
Yeah, it's a pretty broad topic. Part of it I will leave alone today, but the bit that concerns me the most about it is businesses taking on more indebtedness without the certainty of being able to repay it back. That's outside my jurisdiction, but that might have been something McGrath Nicol could have touched on last week, but suggest we have that as a topic for another day, if not. In terms of how it will work, the only way I can see it working with the major banks is that there still has to be some sort of criteria of assessment, because we want to make sure, as much as the client does, that they're going to be able to repay this loan. Not a lot of business, small business, has capacity to pay back a 250 grand loan in 3 years, particularly when we've just come out of the biggest crisis of the last 100 years. So that's probably the thing that, for me, that sticks out the most. If I was going to sign up for a loan, I'd want to make sure I can meet the repayments. So the solution might be, rather than the government guaranteed loan, say I need a loan of 300, but I need 5 to 7 years to pay it back. That might be the right fit. So going back to having the plan, identify what the cash number is you need, and then do a business case to say, I can pay it back over 5 or 7 years as opposed to 3 if that's not possible. So don't just limit yourself to chasing the 250. Look at the real need and address that with your bank. And part of that loan might be is to make up for 6 months of non-normal trading this year, which I think is a valid business reason given what's happened. If you're a hotel, even if hotels reopen in 4 weeks' time, the level of trading will be really low because people still will be nervous. People won't have the money to spend. Like it'll be a slow few months. So, but how is it going to work? I can't definitively give the answer yet because we're still waiting for detail, but I believe it's imminent. But I do think normal credit processes will apply, but I suppose that's something I can share after today once that detail is to hand.
Yeah, Lisa's been working really hard in the background on creating a resource library, which has got some bits and pieces in there from our presenters last week and some other things that we've been sent. Yep. So if there is guidance that becomes available to you, it'll be really good to
happy to
have that sent through, and we'll make that available to everyone online.
And the biggest problem with that we've found as a bank is you want to create something, but the minute you create it, it could be out of date. So it's such a movable feast. But that's why I think the dialogue's important, and just read as much as you
can. Yeah. In terms of the actual operations of the banks at this point in time, I was at it seems like an eternity ago, but it's probably 3 weeks ago, I was at a briefing with Shane Elliott, and he had talked about, A teams and B teams and trying to have people working remotely and things like that. I mean, it is that new way of operating still bedding down in the industry, or have the decisions been made quickly?
Look, we're blessed here at Judo. We've got a cloud-based technology, so I found working from home last week seamless. I'm in the team that's in the office this week. Major banks that I've worked at, probably the systems could be a little bit more clunky, so working from home could be challenging. The biggest issue the major banks are probably going to have, and us, is like signing loan documents. A lot of those do require original signatures. So, pre this, the bank manager would go out to the business and sign them up in person and or leave documents to get legal advice. Now, that's not a practical reality. It just might slow down. Some banks have got DocuSign for home loan docs, but when it comes to commercial loan documents, that's probably all manual. Now, the other chestnut in all of that is some of the banks have outsourced their loan documents offshore. So if those offshore hubs have shut down, I don't know what that means for their capability to produce loan documents. We don't have that issue because we get documents prepared legally in Australia, and that's still business as usual. But I think most of the banks should be fine for day-to-day stuff, yeah.
We've had a comment through just to say, a big issue will be the production of timely and accurate financial information to understand position and model of scenarios, and from a business owner's point of view, to be mindful of the actual resource availability to do this. Internal finance teams are going to be under a lot of pressure, and as you said earlier on, the accountants could be the busiest people in Australia at the minute. Is it better the going of the conversation with you at least started with the short-term view while you work on the medium and long-term view?
Yeah, I don't think you can possibly work on the medium to long-term view at the moment because everything just keeps changing. I think if you just did a simple spreadsheet, what your weekly inflows and outflows are, what you think for the next 3 months would be just a great document to have as a starting point. And by inflows and outflows, I just mean on a cash basis, because all the other accounting parts to it probably go out the window. Cash is king at the moment. So, and that might be that you've got a cash deficit for the next 2 months, but you've just got to call it out and go, part of the reason I need the loan is to, as a bridging gap till I can trade normally again. So that, just call it as it is.
Are you seeing anything in the conversations with customers around their ability to get paid? I think we've mentioned about bad debt provision, but anecdotally we're hearing about terms being sort of unilaterally reviewed by folk in the supply chain, and your customers maybe that would have been great payers have all of a sudden just said, "Oh, hang on a second, let's wait to see where we are with this," and that sort of payments side of things is started to seize up a bit. Are you seeing that with customers as well?
Yeah, I suppose there's two sides to it. There's two tiers of customers. Like a lot of large corporates have been given a directive by the government to pay small suppliers promptly. And I know BHP were running a ad over the weekend saying that they're going to pay all their suppliers ahead of time, which is great. But the smaller end of town, if your debtor's Pete Ryan's Plumbing in Port Melbourne, they might, or plumbing's probably not a good example, but a business that's struggling, they won't be able to pay. So I think it's very important there on your list, and I did include that at the start, when you prepare for your discussion with the bank. If I was going to have that discussion, I would have had a conversation with all my major debtors and all my major creditors as to, can I get any extension with your credit terms with suppliers, and with your debtors, are there any bad debts in there that, or someone that can't pay, and what can they pay? And you're just going to have to be engaging with people and go, just tell me how it is. Don't tell me you'll pay next week. just let them know I'm making commitments off the back of these discussions with my clients. So, it's just a lot of telephone calls, but I think because everyone's in the same boat, I think you're probably going to get more honesty now than you would normally. That'd be my thought, but I could be wrong.
Okay. I know you're super busy there, and you're probably the only banker that people can get on the phone in your place today. So we're sort of keeping you half an hour away from customers. But sort of summing up, the advice is have the conversations early, know your position, be honest, look at what you need, be clear about what you need, why you need it, and what the plan is around it. Don't feel that you're locked into certain figures and terms based on what's been announced on stimulus. Base your ask around what your business actually needs.
And I'll give you a live example of that. So a week and a half ago, we rang all our clients, and some of them are rent roll real estate agents, and they were pretty much unaffected. And then 2 days later, private inspections and that changed, and the auction rules and crowds, all of a sudden they are impacted. And it looks like there's going to be a softening of property sales. So you can be fine. You can have one set of assumptions and numbers today, but in 2 weeks' time, that can all change. So don't feel embarrassed if it does, because it's happening to everyone.
Another comment through from our audience around very much agreeing with your comment around cash is king, and all the decisions should be taken through that prism, the short term, but as regards the medium term, maybe don't think about cutting too deep, as when things do start to normalise, however long that takes, that leaving yourself in a predicament where you don't actually have the resources to respond to improving market conditions can be damaging.
Yeah, and even, look, I had an old client of mine call me today, and he's probably the most worried of anyone I've spoken to in the last 2 weeks. And his business is still functioning and going, but all his staff have agreed to a 50% pay cut indefinitely, just to keep everyone employed, and they're pretty close at the business. So, I think your point's very valid, because he didn't want to let staff he's had for 10 years go and then have to find someone that's only half as good, because that will affect his business in the longer term, trying to replace that talent.
Okay. Pete, thanks for taking half an hour in what must be a pretty busy day for you, and
that's okay.
Well done on finding a green.
If there's still more questions, I'm all right to another few minutes.
I think we're wrapped up on the questions at this stage, and we expect that we'll be seeing a few more coming through. Well done finding a room that was painted in chamber colours as well. That's a lovely touch. I think you're the first of our presenters who went to that trouble.
I picked the room especially.
Yeah. All right. Look, thanks for sharing those insights with us. We'll look forward to receiving some of the information, and we'll get it up online as soon as we can. But thanks everyone for coming on, taking part, and Pete, thanks for the insights. All the best, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Good luck, everyone.
See ya.